Ambassador Gordon Sondland not only implicated the president in a quid pro quo, but he also made an important distinction that, according to Democrats, shows the president was more interested in smearing Joe Biden than cracking down on corruption in Ukraine.
Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election, DNC server, and Burisma.
He had to get those two investigations if that official act was going to take place, correct?
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
You understood that in order to get that White House meeting that you wanted President Zelensky to have, and that President Zelensky desperately wanted to have, that Ukraine would have to initiate these two investigations. Is that right?
Well, they would have to announce that they were going to do it. I never heard, Mr. Goldman, anyone say that the investigations had to start or had to be completed. The only thing I heard from Mr. Giuliani or otherwise was that they had to be announced in some form, and that form kept changing.
So just pulling back, that's vintage Trump. That's what he did in New York City with the New York Post and the Daily News and all the press outlets, that he did with Ted Cruz during the campaign. He uses his National Enquirer and his friends at the New York Post and all these different media empires to smear people. And he was trying to do the same thing on the world stage, using a foreign leader to smear a political rival. It not only is all the evidence piling up, it's also vintage Donald Trump.
It's his MO.
It's his MO.
Okay, so listen, here's the deal. The most difficult geopolitical crisis I have coming into the office is North Korea. I'm not going to actually do any groundwork. I'm not going to actually try to figure out how to stop North Korea from having the capability of using their missiles to strike America and kill tens of millions of Americans. I'm going to get a photo event. I'm just going to get a summit. And that's the same thing here. Oh, no, you don't have to do the investigations. And why would they do the investigations, by the way? Because we learned later in the day that, of course, they had been cleared of any corruption. But no, he didn't want the investigations. He just wanted the foreign leader of a Democratic Party whose country was invaded by Vladimir Putin and who desperately needed defensive weapons to just hold a press conference smearing his chief political domestic rival.
The president just wanted the show, whether it was a news conference, an interview on CNN by Zelensky. He wanted to announce the investigation. There didn't have to be teeth to it. There didn't have to be follow-up. This simply had to be the president getting a damaging news story against his opponent.
Correct.
The other thing that Sondland did yesterday that cannot be overstated here, his quote is simple. Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret. And he implicated Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Pompeo, Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney, saying that everyone was well aware of the pressure campaign against Ukraine. Everyone was carrying out the president's wishes. It was the president's orders, he said, that they were following through. He connected, like no one before him, this drug deal, to use John Bolton's term, to the Oval Office.
Yeah.
Joyce, you across your career have listened to a lot of testimony. You've induced a lot of testimony from people on the stand. Watching yesterday, Joe was describing it as a contest between
dumb and dumber,
being disingenuous or being stupid. I had a different reaction watching it, and I'm wondering what your reaction was. My reaction was increasingly, as it went on, was depression. I was depressed thinking about what I was hearing and what was happening to our country. What was your reaction?
You know, I'm reminded of the fact that judges, when they send juries to deliberate, tell them you don't have to leave your common sense at the door of the jury room. So you can listen to the evidence, but filter it through what you know to be true. And that's equally the case here for the American people. We don't have to leave our common sense behind as we listen to this testimony. So like you yesterday, I had this horrible feeling of dread as I listened to Ambassador Sondland, because the reality here is that if President Trump is not held accountable, then going forward, it's perfectly acceptable for an American president to use $400 in taxpayer money allocated by Congress to help an ally that's fighting for its life and fighting for us, It's okay for the president to use that money to engage in personal bribery, to get something that he in return can use to manipulate one of our elections. And that is a completely depressing scenario. But as Sondland continued to testify, and you listen to Daniel Goldman, a former mob prosecutor in SDNY, an organized crime prosecutor, he began to elicit evidence that will build a narrative that whether or not Republicans ultimately are publicly persuaded by it, they will know to be the truth. This was a vintage mob operation with Trump at the top, not putting his fingers too directly on things, but sending out his Lieutenant Rudy Giuliani, who Sondland told us they all knew that when they took Rudy Giuliani's orders, he was speaking for the president. And it's clear now to all of us how this worked and that it really was a bribery scam.
You know, Joe, one of the interesting things that happened yesterday, I was speaking to someone involved in this inquiry in Washington, and they were stating what Joyce just said, that Trump, if you follow the behavior, the verbal behavior of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, it's like following the behavior of a mob boss. He speaks always as if he's aware it might be wired, that something around him might be wired. And he is never saying, Willie, you go do it. He never a direct order to someone intimately involved in this thing.
Well, there's a good reason for that. I mean, he was around the mob his entire adult life. I mean, he even bragged about he loved working with a mob because they could actually lay cement faster than anybody else. Ask Jimmy Hoffa. But he dealt with a mob. He grew up with a mob surrounding him. When he went to New Jersey, he was dealing with a mob. So, yeah, he knows how to work that way. And I suspect, as Maggie Haberman has said, the guy's always just trying to survive the next 10 minutes. So, yeah, he thinks people are listening at all times.
Remember Michael Cohen's testimony. He never directly tells you what to do, but you always know what to do.
Yeah.
Donald Trump signals it to you. I would add in your dumb, dishonest question, one more entry if I could. When Devin Nunes compared Donald Trump to George Washington in 1794 and said George Washington used back channels to talk to the British too, personal channels. So I'll let the viewers decide which or both that is. Elise Jordan, so on a day when we followed the president's orders and everyone was in the loop, quotes from Ambassador Sondland. I think the one that Mika just played might have been the most important that Jonathan referred to, which is when Ambassador Sondland testified, look, I knew these investigations weren't actually going to happen. We just had to announce that they were going to happen. They didn't have to start. They didn't have to be completed. It was just the impression that get this story out there about Joe Biden, not actually go after corruption, which gets to the core of we were worried about corruption in Ukraine. Republicans said the president very concerned about corruption in Ukraine. Of course he wasn't, and that's what Ambassador Sondland testified to yesterday.
No, as always, Donald Trump just wanted the photo op, like he wanted the photo op with Kim Jong-un. And I'm going to add that he had to pull in Ivanka, too, just at the nice dose of nepotism with that little foreign policy debacle. And then with this, you see where Donald Trump has no concern about corruption. We're supposed to go through the mental gymnastics of telling ourselves, well, it was just this one company out of all the companies in Ukraine that are corrupt, and Donald Trump just cared about that. It wasn't connected at all to Biden.
Right.
And you're supposed to keep up. Following the logic, to be able to lie to yourself this much is, I almost pity the Republicans for it, but they're too craven, and they absolutely stand for nothing. And I just wonder if they really have any conception of the long-term damage that they're doing to America's foreign policy in the world.
And again, to their reputation. This is all going to come back and blow up in their face. It just is. I mean, there are a lot of people that were hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s thinking, man, I can't believe what I'm getting away with. I mean, it all comes out in the end. And this will come out in the end. Except in this case, this drug deal, I mean, the people running this drug deal were so dumb. Like, it's just like, they were like, let's go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and sort the heroin. Then we'll decide where we're going to sell it, right?
Things out in the open.
Because
it desensitizes people.
You had Laura Cooper saying in the afternoon, the corruption review, yeah, that was done in May. We said it was fine to release the aid because that was done in the spring, and this drug deal that was trying to get an announcement in the late summer about corruption, it already passed. Key point from DOD official, says Ambassador Michael McFaul. Laura Cooper, DOD did a review of corruption in Ukraine and certified there was no reason to withhold military assistance. But then Trump intervened, undermined the argument that aid was held up to combat corruption in Ukraine. They'd already decided no corruption in Ukraine. We're fine.
And it was clear of testimony the last couple of days. Every person in the national security community believed the aid should have been issued. There was no holdup. The aid was vital for Ukraine. It was only when the president and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, intervened that it was stopped. And that is here. And the chronology obviously does not work in the president's favor. It is being spelled out day after day. Now, whether, in the grand scheme of things, this changes minds of Republicans in the Senate, we don't know. The reporting has been right now that they seem, at least so far, unmoved, despite the damning amount of evidence that this is what happened. The president it was his orders to engage in this drug deal. And we've heard this from everyone. We've heard this from everyone, and Ambassador Sondland in particular yesterday. But yet, to this point, Republicans seem unmoved.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.